since this is such a short webinar, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We may have some people trickle in as we go on, but I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Mary Ford, and I'm the Director of Engagement and External Relations for the Mid-Atlantic Regional Association Coastal Ocean Observing System, which is MARICUS. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll give a brief overview of MARICUS, and then we'll discuss our high-frequency radar network, and then open it up for questions. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. All attendees will be on mute. You can ask questions in the question and answer section of the program at any point during the presentations, and we'll go through them all at the end. With that said, I think I'll hand things off to Gerhard Kustka, the MARICUS Executive Director, and he will give a brief overview of MARICUS. So Gerhard, you want to take it over?
Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Gerhard Kustka, and as Mary said, I'm the Executive Director of MARICUS. High frequency radar is one of the areas that we deal with and what we're going to focus on today. MARICUS is a 501c3 entity, a nonprofit that collects and uses information to deal with societal issues. We're part of the IUS network, U.S. Integrated Ocean Observing System. That is a public-private partnership that covers both the federal aspect, the 17 U.S. federal agencies that are part of IUS, as well as not the external or non-governmental entities that form the 11 regions, of which MARICUS is one. Our footprint is in the Mid-Atlantic Bight from Cape Cod to Cape Hatteras. And many of you who have engaged with IUS in the past and with MARICUS are familiar. So for those of you that will hear some of the things you've heard already, I'll apologize in advance. And for those of you who don't, I'm really happy you're here to learn more about what we do based on the work that you've supported over the past couple of years. Next slide, please. So MARICUS and IUS in general is supported primarily through the Integrated Coastal Observing System legislation and the appropriations that flow from that. The original legislation was passed by Congress back in 2009, and we've been working to reauthorize that with Congress and with the various administrations through time. Currently, HR 729 has passed the House, and S914 is in final negotiations. We're really hopeful that we will pass this session, and we want to thank all of you for your support in trying to get this legislation into law so that we can build on the strong foundation, legislative foundation that we started back in 2009. As an extension of that, our appropriations have continued to grow thanks to your hard work and the efforts of us working together as a nation and as a group of regions under our umbrella organization, the IUS Association. You can see I've listed there 40.5 million for the external. This is not the federal piece. These are the regions, the 11 regions that I spoke of, and you can see the committee's language, the report language that emphasizes not just underwater gliders, but filling critical gaps in current surface mapping, which we're going to talk about today to deal with some of the critical issues like weather forecasting, ecological phenomena, and safe maritime operations. And I want to thank you in particular for continuing to acknowledge the importance of these platforms and the work that they do to address these critical issues. Next slide. So everything we do focuses on a purpose. All the work we do is applied, and so we look to the user communities, we look to those folks that are making decisions, whether it's in government, whether it's in the private sector, whether it's at the individual or organizational level, and understand what their informational needs are so that we can direct the expertise in our region to focus on those issues, whether it's maritime safety, fisheries and other natural resources, water quality, offshore energy, as well as onshore energy, which benefits from our work, and coastal hazards, which includes a whole host of things, including sea level rise, storms, hurricanes, things like that. There are a variety of platforms, assets, devices we use, from satellites to the underwater gliders that we spoke of, which we'll be covering in another webinar session soon, and high frequency radar which is what we're talking about today. We also support modeling, which gives us the predictions that underpin some of the products that we develop for the communities, as well as the models and products coming out of partners like the government and the private sector. Next slide, please. So I'd like to segue into HF radar by introducing Dr. Hugh Rorty, who is our high frequency HF radar lead for the Mid-Atlantic, and he's based at Rutgers University. And with that, Hugh, please.
Thanks, Gerhard. So yeah, hi everyone. So I lead a team that operates a network of radars in the Mid-Atlantic of the United States. So we cover 1,000 kilometers of coastline from Cape Cod to Cape Hatteras. And this overview slide introduces you to that radar network. So we have a total of 41 stations in the Mid-Atlantic, and each of the stations, some are long-range systems on the left. There's 17 long-range systems, and they can measure currents out to 150 miles from the coast. On the right-hand side are higher resolution systems that we have in major estuaries. So New York Harbor, Delaware Bay, Chesapeake, Block Island. And then in New Jersey, we have a medium range network that is focused on assessing offshore wind resources for offshore wind development. And then you can see here, in the red squares are pictures of the antennas. So the thing that we like about this type of technology is that it's low profile, low power. It's very easy to install and remove the equipment. It takes about maybe half a day to set up the equipment, and then you're up and running, collecting data. So we like that feature of the technology. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then here's an animation showing what the currents are measured by the radar network over a 3-day period. So the black arrows are the surface currents as measured by the radar network, and then the red dot is a virtual drifter that we've released in that surface current field. So that could be a person that's fallen overboard, or that could represent an oil spill, or anything that's floating on the surface of the ocean. So in this area of the Mid-Atlantic, it just happens to be off Nantucket. It's a very dynamic environment. The currents are very energetic. And so here after 3 days, a particle that was released is now 15 miles away from where it was released. And so having an accurate map of surface currents is very crucial if you're looking to locate something in the ocean or assess where something might float to. Next slide. Okay, so the Marcuse HF radar network was established in 2007, and the initial purpose for the radar network was to provide surface currents to the U.S. Coast Guard for search and rescue. So the slides here show a comparison between HF radar currents on the right in blue, and then let's say an ocean model currents on the left in red. And so the benefit of the HF radar currents is that it reduces the search area by a factor of 3. So you get a much more accurate estimate of what the surface currents are from the radar network compared to an ocean model. So then after a 1-year blind study by the US Coast Guard in May of 2009, we approved the Coast Guard for search and rescue. Okay, next slide. And so this graphic here shows the growth of the Coast Guard's use for this product. So in 2009, we were approved to start providing data. In January of 2012, we had a few data points as to the use by the Coast Guard. And then in January of 2017, started to receive from the Coast Guard monthly statistics on the use by the Coast Guard. And so we're averaging about 100 times per week. The Coast Guard is accessing the data and using it in their search and rescue operations and training. Okay, next slide. Okay, and so we're working well with the Coast Guard, providing this data to them, but we're also looking to expand the use of the data with other federal agencies. This figure here shows our work with the National Weather Service. So in November of 2018, there was a winter storm that made its way through our area, as shown on the left. And then on the right are surface currents by the network. And the one thing to note is that the low pressure system in the weather model is indicated by the red L, and it's just onshore, just off of Virginia. But then if you look at the currents on the right, the currents are indicating that the low pressure system is actually further offshore. So we're trying to work with the Weather Service to utilize these surface current measurements to improve their and their forecasts. And then in addition to the surface currents that the radar network provides, the figure here shows we can also measure wave height applications. So this is the wave height storm. So before the storm, the wave heights off the coast were about 1 meter, and then they gradually increased to 5 meters. And actually it topped out at our threshold for wave measurements, but then and then gradually dropped back down to 1 meter a few days later. So there's a dual use capability for the radar network, surface currents, and in some applications, wave heights as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I think we just wanted to talk about some of the impacts that the radar network is seeing from the current pandemic that we're experiencing. So I mentioned before, the network is established in 2007, but some of the radars date back to 1998, 1999. And so some of the hardware is starting to show its age, and some of the these aging equipment is leading to increased failures. And so if when we identify a failure, it has to go back to the manufacturer for repair, and the manufacturer is located in California, and they were also experiencing the pandemic. And so that's leading to longer turnaround times for our repair requests. We've had to put on hold all our preventative maintenance at the radar sites and the calibrations as well. And all this combined is going to lead to gaps in coverage and a less accurate surface current product. And so that less accurate surface current product is then going to impact Coast Guard operations. So they're going to have to possibly search longer to locate someone, and they'll have to expend more resources for that search. Okay, next slide. I'll take, I guess we'll open up to the panel and any questions that you may have.
Yeah, again, just as a reminder, we will, if you type the questions in the question and answer section. I have a question here. What federal agencies do you provide the data to?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Coast Guard, I mentioned the National Weather Service. Those are our two main customers, but we also provide to the USGS as well.
Actually, also, could I add that the National Ocean Service is using these currents for their ports product for New York and for Chesapeake Bay for pilots to navigate the entranceways to the harbor.
Great, thanks. Next question is, do you have partners in all of the states in the Mid-Atlantic?
Yes, so we have various partners. so at each of the radar locations, we need to secure permission to place the equipment. And so that might be a local municipality, or it might be a national park, or it might be a Coast Guard base. And so we've been able to partner with institutions in each of the states where radars are located. And it's been a very fruitful partnership that they're able to provide us access to power and communications. And then we provide then back to them data that they might find useful.
Okay, next question is, are there any HF radar stations that are currently down and unable to be repaired?
Yeah, so right now there's one radar station down. It's the Cedar Island site. It's located on the eastern shore of Virginia. And the problem with it's a very remote site, and the power that is provided at the location was disabled due to some telephone poles falling over. And so we're currently in contact with the owner of the property where the radar is located, as well as the utility company, to come up with a plan as to if power will be restored to that location, so then operations can begin again.
Great. Next question is, what would happen if the network were down and there was an oil spill or natural disaster?
Yeah, so if the network was down, then the responding agencies then would have to rely upon the ocean models for guidance, but then they wouldn't have any validation data for that model. So they might not necessarily have a good confidence in the model as to which way it was directing ocean currents.
Are there any information gaps in the network?
Let's see, can you expand upon information gaps?
I'll let the person follow up. We can put a pin in that question for now. Is COVID-19 impacting other aspects of your system?
I guess, yeah, it's making it more challenging to manage the network being at home. We have a lot of specialized tools and displays at our respective institutions. But a lot of the diagnostics and our ability to manage the network is we can do from home. So it's not ideal, but I guess we're managing.
If these circumstances of isolation continue over the next 3 to 6 months, what additional impacts will that have, and how are you planning for that?
Yeah, so if I was confined, or the team is confined to their homes for the next 6 months, I think we would see some impact on the radar network. Like for instance, I was talking to a technician today. We had a slight outage at a site in Cape May Point, and so we're discussing with him as to how we respond. And so the pandemic is I guess adding an extra burden to us in terms of how we respond to outages. And so we'll have to come up with a plan of action if we feel that the social distancing is going to extend for another 6 months.
Mary, if I could add to that, I think that we've had to become creative with how we deal with servicing out-of-state sites, because some of our institutional partners service sites close to their state but in another state. So, for example, Virginia might will service also the Maryland sites. That the inability to travel to another state, or in situations where an individual is either compromised or not doesn't feel comfortable, we have allowed and continue to dialogue with folks about their comfort levels, about their responsibilities in terms of dealing with care for others at home, and some of the issues that come along with having to be isolated with children, those sorts of things. The longer this continues, the more pressure is placed on our ability to service things as they may break down. Keep in mind, a good portion of the network is older than 10 years old, some 15 years old, which is more than the manufacturer suggests. And so the incidence of repairs goes up quite a lot, and our ability to maintain them, of course, is not able to keep up with that. And so a couple things you can do is either replace some of that equipment, which is in our long-term strategy and part of our Fill the Gaps campaign that we're working on with Congress through the IS Association, as well as being able to maintain additional spares and come up with strategies like, for example, getting exceptions for certain personnel. So, for example, in Virginia and in New Jersey, for example, we have gotten special permission from the institutional partners to allow and declare that individual to be essential. We deem these data to be essential. Our partners deem these data to be essential. We just need to then work the bureaucracy, work the relationships to ensure that the entire chain understands that, and that we get permission to be able to safely and effectively service the equipment and keep the data flowing to those products and to those partners. And so that the longer this goes on, the more that becomes a challenge, and the more that we need to look to alternate solutions like updating equipment, like getting more spares and replacing things maybe sooner than we had originally envisioned before this happened.
Thanks, Gerhard. And I think this question came in while you were talking, but the question is, what can be done to build more resilience in the network? I don't know if there's anything else. I know you touched on a couple things, but I don't know if there's anything you want to emphasize with that, or if you
yeah, so
Simon.
Right now, so the spacing of the stations is minimum in order to output a surface current product. So if we were able to add additional stations along the coast, and if one of those stations goes down, then there's overlap with other stations, and so the product is not impacted by the one station going down. So the ability to add additional radars to the network would add resiliency into the system.
Great, thanks. And what can Congress do to help?
Yeah, Gerhard, you want to take this one?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, first of all, I'll just say thank you again, because I think the support of Congress and the support of all of you has been nothing short of amazing over the past several years. But as the pressure mounts, I think we find the things that we had hoped we would deal with over the long term becoming more critical. Our ability to fill the gaps in the entire surface current network. I'm not just talking about the Mid-Atlantic, I'm talking about the entire country. And our colleague, Josie Quintrell, I believe, is probably listening in here. And those of you that don't know her, she is the executive director of the ICE Association, and you'll see her on the Hill from time to time if you haven't already. Obviously not now, but when we're back running around DC with all of you. But the campaign that we've been had going for several years has been looking and trying to fill critical gaps. We need, obviously, some regions have more gaps than others, and some of the strategies that Hugh pointed out will work here in the Mid-Atlantic as we try to build and strengthen what is already a very strong network. But there are other parts of the country that haven't been able to emphasize and focus on filling the gaps in their surface current network. Places like the Gulf of Mexico, for example, so just pick one, but there are places all over the country that have a need to fill gaps, not just building additional strength and resilience, but filling fundamental areas that are lacking data, where the Coast Guard could use this to support their life-saving efforts there, as well as other products that we've mentioned. So Congress can do a couple things, and without getting into too many specifics, I think us getting the ICOS reauthorization through would be a really strong sign. And then working with the ICE Association on the fill the gaps and looking for opportunities either through some of the supplemental funding that's happening now for infrastructure, I think are excellent opportunities for us to look at jump-starting and actually tackling some of these significant vulnerabilities in aging infrastructure. So those are just two ideas, and we'd be happy to talk offline with Josie and others with you about these issues.
Thanks, Gerhard. So we're almost at time. I want to make sure we get any final questions, or Hugh, Gerhard, if you have any final thoughts before we close.
I mean, it'd be great to for those that are interested, once we get back to a time when when folks feel comfortable and our governors have moved to safely peel back some of the restrictions that we have in place now to protect and try to combat the spread of the virus. Once we get to that point, we'd love to have you out to take a look at a site. I mean, it's never a bad thing to go to a site, but if it's from your particular member's district, or just a place you'd like to come that's close to DC, like straight across to Delaware or Virginia or Jersey, Maryland, we'd be happy to invite you at a convenient time and have you come out and see and get a more in-depth look. And we can even have some discussions with some of the stakeholders. Sometimes it's nice to have them talk about how they make decisions with data and what's important to them, because those are the constituents that your bosses represent. So we'd be happy to organize those sorts of things to help further provide you with the information so that you can do your jobs successfully and continue to support this important work. So I'll just give one last shout out and thank you for your support thus far.
Yeah, the one thing I'd close on is in the current pandemic that we're experiencing, we're getting a lot of guidance from models as to how the virus is spreading, but those models need to be validated with data. And we experience the same thing in the ocean. A lot of our guidance is given to us by ocean models, but then those models need measurements to make sure that they're valid and accurate. And so the radar network and some of the other measurements that we make within MARCUS play that critical role to validate those ocean models that we rely upon in our operations.
Thanks, Hugh. Thanks, Gerhard. And thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Recording of this webinar will be posted on the MARCUS website in the coming days, and we'll email out the link once it's available. If there are any other questions, don't hesitate to email info@maricus.org, and we'll make sure to get you to the right person. With that, we're going to close the webinar. Have a great day, everybody, and stay safe and healthy.